This is the Spirit and Wellness Show. News and information from a higher perspective. With your host, Harry Wilkinson.
Hello, this is your host, Harry Wilkinson, and welcome to the Spirit and Wellness Show. This is the show where we take a look at the days and weeks events, happenings in the world of international relations, politics, the media, all of these different types of stories and interactions that we deal with throughout our day, throughout our week, and we take a look at them from a higher perspective. And from a higher perspective, I'm talking about a spiritual perspective, not religious, but spiritual, from the perspective of, taking the step back, recognizing the oneness that we all share, and seeing how we reflect that in the stories, situations, national and international events that we create. And we create them, and we are creating them continuously, by the way, at the highest level of our being. That being the level of what some call co-creation. That means that we are essentially at a level in which we are not aware of in our mundane everyday existence, or maybe, I won't say not aware of, but sort of dimly aware of, that we are setting the stage for the sort of interactions that we go through in our mundane existence. Our not mundane as in boring, but in our everyday situations. And so we are creating these circumstances, these events in our lives and in the lives of others to help us remember who and what we are, but also to engage in different ways of thinking, feeling, and coming to an understanding of what the true nature of our being is. So, in a nutshell, that's what this is all about. It sounds pretty heavy. I try to keep it as light as possible. In this show, we're going to be talking about reflections, because this seemed to be very much a week of reflection for a number of reasons. We have a few anniversaries here. We have, the oldest anniversary is 70 years ago, when atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima in Japan after the ending of World War II, or ushering in the end of World War II, and ushering in the nuclear age. We have a one-year anniversary of the incident with Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. It's interesting to reflect back on what we were doing a year ago. It was an awfully busy time. Some pretty momentous things that happened. We had the Michael Brown case in Ferguson, which has since brought to the fore the injustices and inequalities that many black Americans and other minorities are feeling deeply in many of our cities and towns at the hands of authority figures, particularly the police. And really, if you think about it, Ferguson kicked off a whole revelation of really horrible things. Overuse of violence, intimidation, an out-and-out murder. As I mentioned before in previous episodes of this show, for the past 3 years, since 2012, I've been talking about our being in a period of social upheaval. And this is due to, and I explained, the astrological alignment or conflict between the planet of Uranus and the planet of Pluto. Uranus being the planet of revolution and change, Pluto being the planet of either obsessiveness, ultimate authority, and ultimate destruction. So, we've seen it, as I mentioned, we saw playing out all over the world, situations where the change is bumping up against those that are wanting to hold on to as much power as they possibly can. So we saw it in the Arab Spring, and we saw it in Ukraine, and we saw it in this country with things like Ferguson, but also with the increasing awareness of income inequality in this country, and the inability for people of average means to get ahead, and how that is on the decline. So all of these things were sort of revelations for a lot of people who may or may not have understood that they were actually going on. And now that they've been revealed, thanks to that astrological alignment, which is now over, we are now, I think, squarely, clearly in the age of transition, where these things are making rapid change in many instances. Maybe not as rapid as we'd like in some cases, but in other cases we're seeing rapid change in things like the gay marriage debate, which is basically essentially over now. Things like the Confederate flag, that took decades for people to get on board with not having that flown in people's faces, out of respect and out of understanding of how that makes many people feel. So we're seeing these changes, and I'm saying that we're in this era of transition, and I think this reflection week that we have is a good way to reflect on the transitions that are happening and have happened in the past, and how we are expressing them. So we're going to talk about all of these incidents. And also, if we have time, we'll do our wellness portion of the show, which is we're going to talk about some ways to, we've been talking about yoga poses, and we're going to talk about some stretches for those of you who may suffer with lower back pain at some point, or stiffness, aches. I know I seem to be having some issues with that, and I know many other people do as well. So that's something we'll talk about, as well as the dangers of overthinking and how we can sometimes make ourselves crazy by doing so. So, on with the show. The first thing I want to talk about is the shift in tone. Oh, briefly, I just want to mention before we go into the anniversaries that we're going to talk about. And by the way, the other anniversary I meant to mention, the other thing that was going on a year ago that was really quite a stunner for a lot of us, was the death of comedian actor Robin Williams by suicide. And it was a year ago this week that he took his own life. So we'll talk about what that kind of meant for a lot of people, and still does. Again, before we go into that, I just want to talk briefly about the shift in tone regarding our environmental policies, which we talked briefly about last week, and President Obama announced his intentions and the intentions of the Environmental Protection Agency to ensure the capping of the release of carbon and greenhouse gases that will be, nationwide standards. And, he's prepared everybody for what is essentially going to be a battle, because there are those, who feel that the government should not be telling the states, how to take care of their pollution. And what the president is saying is that there needs to be national consensus on it. And there seems to be quite a bit of leeway in which states can make certain things happen to reduce their carbon emissions. But reduce their carbon emissions they must. And there's a variety of ways they can do it. But what the Obama administration is saying, that you have to do it. And here are ways you can do it. And we're not going to tell you how you have to do it. But we're just going to tell you that you have to do it. Because it's our planet. And the effects of climate change are upon us. So good on him. There's going to be pushback, but so far, actually, remarkably, there doesn't seem to be quite as much pushback as certainly I would have expected, and I think a lot of other people were expecting as well. It may be that it's part of our transition era that we live in. Well, it certainly is. I mean, this is part of the transition. How long it's going to take, we don't know. Okay, so now let's take a look at Hiroshima, 70 years on. It happened in 1945. Hiroshima was the first to have the bombs dropped, and 3 days later, Nagasaki. So, this was the first and thankfully only time that nuclear weapons have been used in history. So if you think about that, this is 70 years now that we've had nuclear weapons, and all kinds of tensions and fights over countries that have them. And the amazing fact that they have yet to be used another time by anybody is something to really be, I don't know if I want to say proud, but something to really take into consideration. That's how powerful the effects of what Hiroshima meant, not only to the Japanese, of course, but worldwide. People saw and heard the nightmarish horror that was unleashed on these people. And Hiroshima being a physical, very physical illustration of what nuclear weapons could do, I think has been the main factor that has kept nuclear bomb usage at bay. Well, the bombing was meant to put an end to World War II. When the bomb was dropped by the Enola Gay, 70,000 people were believed to have been killed. There's, of course, no way to have an exact count of that, but on the initial day, that's how many people were killed. And then as days and weeks went on, the injuries caused by the radiation poisoning and other after effects caused many, many more to die. And of course, the viewpoint is that those bombs were necessary to end the war, and perhaps that's true. But if you think about what the result was and how devastating, I think you can ask yourself, maybe there was another way to end the war? What if the nuclear weapons didn't work or didn't exist? The nuclear weapon had really just been invented, literally. I mean, just rolled out of the factory when they dropped the bomb on Hiroshima. And probably, in fact, certainly, I don't think Americans at that time, even those in, the military and in the halls of power, if you will, understood what the atomic bomb did. I don't think they realized what an incredible force of power that was. And there's always been and continues to be a great deal of guilt and soul-searching among Americans about Hiroshima. Some say that, as I said, the U.S. was justified in dropping the bombs. However, as I said, there were all kinds of other efforts going on too in Tokyo, firebombing and other things that certainly would have more than adequately, eventually brought, the Japanese people to the point of surrender. But basically, what happened was we had a new toy, and they wanted to try it. And as I say, I don't think people really understood what that meant. So, in any event, as I say, this remembrance, this event that we created, certainly has brought to the consciousness of all how powerful we can be. It was one step to understanding, and we don't have anywhere near a complete understanding of that, but one step towards a realization of just how powerful we can be, that we can create, we can destroy. And as dear old Uncle Ben of Spider-Man fame, not the rice guy, told Peter Parker, with great power comes great responsibility. And though we may not talk about it much, I think that's the lesson that folks have learned. Interesting. Because if you notice that transition to this age of power and understanding that power. And now, 70 years on, we have this deal with Iran in which we are encouraging them and, incentivizing them to not make nuclear weapons. And we've reduced our nuclear capacity, that's for sure. I think we've got a ways to go before we go completely nuclear disarmament, but I think that will happen eventually. Maybe or maybe not in my or your lifetime, but at some point, I do believe it will happen. All right, so now the next remembrance that we have is, in more recent memory, only a year ago, of course, and it's the Michael Brown shooting. Michael Brown was an unarmed black teenager. And here's the interesting thing. There are other incidences that happened with other young men in which, shootings happened that were, maybe more egregious and less ambiguous. This officer, Darren Wilson, shot the boy based on how he felt the boy was acting and his feeling that his life was in danger, even though the boy had no weapon. Now, it's absolutely, not in dispute that Michael Brown was and had been acting erratically and somewhat aggressively. Before he was shot, he had been in a small store, and he had, I believe he had robbed some small things. What was it? Maybe it was candy or beef jerky or something. I can't remember now. It's there's been so much that's happened since then. But he was shot with with what essentially is, or witnesses have said that his hands were up when he was shot. So this became a rallying cry which is still going on. I mean, the whole Black Lives Matter movement has been gaining in momentum as more and more of these incidents come, sort of tumbling out into the, spotlight. And of course, there were, resignations. Of police officers, the chief of police, and so forth and so on. But this really is the incident that has started it all. And since then, of course, in the following year, and I'm not going to do a litany of the incidents that have happened, but there have been repeated incidences very similar in scope and size to this, in which officers are found really overreacting to African Americans in one way or another. And clearly the overreaction is out of fear. Fear is the thing that creates these situations. And fear, if we want to talk from a higher perspective, fear has to do with a belief in separation. In other words, it has to do with the belief that you are other than me, and therefore I have to protect myself from you. There's that fear. there's the old chestnut, I guess, that some people do a little bit of eye rolling when they hear, but I still think it has validity. The idea that fear stands for false evidence appearing real. In other words, the belief or the illusion of separation. So some interesting statistics. They broke down statistics in Ferguson, looking at or attempting to look at the concept of racial bias. 93% of people arrested in Ferguson are African Americans, and the entire population of Ferguson is 67%, only slightly over half. 96% of people arrested for outstanding municipal warrants are African Americans. 95% of manner of walking in roadway charges were against black people. Interesting. So there's charges in the way that you walk down the roadway. I didn't realize that. At least in Ferguson. I don't know around here. 90% of documented force. 90% of documented force by police officers was against African Americans, and 30% of searches of white suspects resulted in a contraband finding, compared with 24% of black suspects. So more white suspects, when they're searched, are carrying, whatever the contraband is, I guess, drugs of some kind. So this has led, as I said, to these studies. They found substantial evidence of intentional discrimination on the part of the police department there, explicit racial bias in communications between police and court. They found that while 2/3 of Ferguson's residents are African American, only 54 police officers are. Only 4 of Ferguson's 54 police officers are. So they have 4 black officers. There's historical hostility towards African Americans living in Ferguson among some police officers, apparently. There was an emphasis on revenue. They wanted to issue fines and those kinds of things to raise money. And unlawful court practices. Oh my goodness, I didn't realize this was happening. Arrest warrants are issued if fines aren't paid instead on the basis of public safety. So until recently, Ferguson added fines for missed court appearances and payments. Minor offenses such as driving or parking violations can generate crippling debts, resulting in jail time because of an inability to pay. So there are a lot of people being put in jail because they can't pay parking tickets or driving violations. And then finally they found excessive force. Police have come to rely on weapons such as tasers when in situations where no force or less force could easily be used. An officer used an electronic weapon against an African American woman in the Ferguson City Jail because she would not go to her cell. They've used police dogs. Interesting. And as I said, 90% of use of force incidents involve African Americans. So all that's been revealed, which means the transition is in process. As difficult as it is to hear, it needs to be heard. And now that it has been heard and will continue to be heard, I think we'll see much change as a result. All right. And Robin Williams. Well, Robin Williams is passing. has since been found to be related to in some ways, his treatment for Parkinson's, which has been known to be a catalyst, for depression, and also part of his recovery from his heart surgery. It's led to a completely different understanding of what depression is and how it works, and that is a transition that needs to happen. Depression isn't just something that happens because you're sad, and it isn't something that just happens because of chemical imbalances in your brain, although that appears to be somewhat of a part of it. It's a complex intertwining of things that can happen to anybody. So much as many of us miss Robin, I think he created his exit, and I don't mean just because of his the suicide aspect of it, but because we all create our exit on that level that I was talking about at the beginning of the show, on that higher level. And I believe he did so to help bring attention to this very important understanding. All right, so let's talk about some stretches, because I promised we'd deal with back pain for our wellness portion, and we're running out of time. So here's a couple of things that you can do when you are experiencing some of these stiffnesses or aches and pains. There's a hamstring floor stretch, in which you just hold 30 seconds twice for each leg, and you bring your knee up to your chest to stretch it. A spinal stretch, in which you lie on the floor, arms out, and twist for about 20 seconds on each side. So with your back still flat on the floor, you twist your hips around to the right for 20 seconds, and then to the left. Bringing your, when you go to the right, you bring your right knee over. When you go to the left, you bring your left knee over. This, believe me, I've done this, and it really is a wonderful stretch, and makes your back feel so much more flexible and all of it. And then one more that I'd like to use is the what they call the hip flexors stretch, which is down on one knee for 30 seconds and then switching and repeating. So those are good moves that work in with your yoga, if you are practicing yoga, that will help you with aches and pains and so forth. So we come to the close of another show. And in your reflections this week, I hope you keep in mind what we've talked about, and keep in mind how far we are coming and how far we're going. What an amazing adventure it all is. See you next week.